Imagine standing in a stadium packed with thousands of people, watching Jimin only a few feet away from you, and then, suddenly, he takes off his jacket and gives it to you. That is exactly the kind of unbelievable moment that unfolded during BTS's Day 2 concert in Baltimore. 1 second, the little fan was simply part of the crowd. The next, she was holding something that had just come directly from Jimin. And the way this happened made the entire moment feel even more special. Because Jimin didn't simply walk past. He noticed. He stopped. And then came the gesture that had ARMY completely losing it. But what happened in those few seconds before Jimin handed over the jacket? And why did this tiny interaction become one of the most heartwarming moments surrounding the Baltimore show? Let's go back to that moment. Because you really need to see how it unfolded. The atmosphere inside the stadium was already electric. Thousands of ARMY were singing, screaming, waving light sticks, and trying to capture every possible second of BTS's Day 2 performance. Everywhere you looked, there were purple lights. The sound of the crowd seemed almost endless. And in the middle of all that chaos was one little fan who probably had no idea that her night was about to become unforgettable. She was there to see BTS. Like everyone else. She probably expected to go home with memories, photos, videos, and maybe a voice that would be completely gone by the end of the night. But there was something she could never have predicted. Jimin would notice her. And somehow, she would end up with his jacket. At first, the interaction seemed almost impossible to notice in a stadium this enormous. There were thousands of people surrounding the stage. Fans were reaching toward the performers. Cameras were flashing. The music was filling the venue. And Jimin was moving through the performance area like he had done countless times before. But then, something changed. Jimin's attention appeared to move toward the fans. And suddenly, the little fan became the center of one of the sweetest moments of the night. This is where you need to pay attention. Because Jimin didn't have to do anything. He could have continued with the performance. He could have simply waved. He could have smiled and moved on. After all, with thousands of people in front of him, it would be impossible to acknowledge everyone individually. But instead, he appeared to make a different choice. He reached for his jacket. And the crowd immediately reacted. Can you imagine what that must have felt like from the little fan's perspective? One moment you're watching your favorite artist. The next, you realize he's taking off something he's wearing. And then you realize he's giving it to you. That isn't the kind of moment you can prepare for. There is no rehearsal for it. No warning. No time to think about what you're supposed to say. Your brain probably just stops working. And that's exactly what made the interaction so adorable. The little fan looked overwhelmed by the moment. And honestly, who wouldn't be? Jimin is standing right there. The stadium is screaming. Thousands of people are watching. And suddenly, you're holding his jacket. A jacket that only moments earlier had been worn by Jimin himself. Think about that for a second. Something that could have been just another part of his concert outfit suddenly became a personal keepsake for one very lucky young ARMY. And the reaction from the crowd? Absolutely priceless. The energy instantly changed. The stadium was already loud. But when people realized what was happening, the excitement seemed to explode all over again. You could almost feel the collective reaction. Wait. Did Jimin just give her his jacket? And that's when the moment became much bigger than a simple exchange. Because this wasn't about the price of the jacket. It wasn't about fashion. It wasn't even really about the object itself. It was about the memory attached to it. Years from now, that little fan may not remember every song from that concert. She may not remember exactly how many times the lights changed. She may not remember every transition between performances. But she is almost certainly going to remember one thing. The moment Jimin gave her his jacket. And that is what makes moments like this so powerful. A concert lasts only a few hours. But one tiny gesture can stay with someone for a lifetime. And there was another detail that made the whole scene even more emotional. The little fan wasn't expecting this. You could see the surprise building almost immediately. She wasn't standing there like someone who knew she was about to receive something. She looked like a fan who had simply been lucky enough to be close to the stage. Then suddenly, everything changed. Jimin approached. The jacket came off. And the moment became real. Just imagine the thoughts running through her head. Is this actually happening? Is he really giving this to me? Am I really holding Jimin's jacket? And before she could even fully process it, it was hers. That kind of moment doesn't feel real while it's happening. Sometimes the biggest memories are the ones where your brain needs a few seconds to catch up with reality. And this little fan had almost no time at all. Because there was still a concert happening. The music was still playing. The audience was still screaming. Jimin still had to continue the show. Yet for a brief moment, everything seemed to slow down. The stadium disappeared. The thousands of people disappeared. And there was just this tiny interaction between an artist and a young fan. That's the magic of live performances. You can watch the same concert footage hundreds of times. But you can never completely recreate the feeling of being there. You can't recreate the sound of thousands of voices surrounding you. You can't recreate the adrenaline. And you definitely can't recreate the feeling of having your favorite artist suddenly notice you. But then something even more beautiful happened. The little fan wasn't just receiving an item. She was receiving a story. A story she could tell for years. Remember when I went to see BTS in Baltimore? Remember what happened? Jimin gave me his jacket. And suddenly, everyone around her becomes part of that memory too. The people standing nearby witnessed it. The people watching from farther away eventually saw the footage. And ARMY around the world started talking about it. One tiny gesture. And thousands of people were smiling. That's something Jimin seems to understand extremely well. Sometimes you don't need a huge speech. You don't need a dramatic announcement. You don't need fireworks. Sometimes a simple gesture says everything. And that's why this moment hit so differently. Because Jimin's gesture wasn't loud. It was personal. In the middle of a massive stadium show, he created a tiny moment that felt incredibly intimate. And honestly, that's the kind of thing fans remember. Not only the spectacular stages. Not only the choreography. Not only the huge production. But the unexpected human moments in between. A wave. A smile. A glance. A small interaction. Or, in this case, a jacket. And let's be honest. If you were that little fan, would you even know what to do? Would you cry? Would you freeze? Would you scream? Would you just stare at the jacket for 5 minutes trying to convince yourself this was real? Because the emotional overload would be unbelievable. You came to a BTS concert expecting to watch Jimin. You never expected to leave with something he personally handed to you. That's a completely different level of concert memory. And there's another reason this moment feels so special. It happened during day 2 in Baltimore. By that point, the excitement surrounding BTS in the city was already enormous. ARMY had spent hours preparing. Fans had traveled. People had waited. Outfits had been planned. Signs had been made. Phones were fully charged. And everyone was hoping for their own unforgettable moment. But no one can predict which moment is actually going to become unforgettable. That's the strange thing about concerts. You can spend weeks planning everything. But sometimes the most emotional moment happens in less than 10 seconds. And this one happened incredibly fast. Jimin noticed the little fan. He interacted with her. The jacket came off. And suddenly, she had a memory that could never be duplicated. But what makes it even sweeter is the contrast. The venue was enormous. The production was massive. The audience was thousands of people deep. Yet the gesture itself was incredibly simple. One person giving something to another. That's it. And somehow, that simplicity made it more powerful. Because when you strip away the lights, the cameras, and the celebrity status, what remains is a human moment. A young fan was excited to see someone she admired. And Jimin gave her a gesture she could treasure. That's the part that gets me. Imagine looking back at that video years from now. Maybe that little fan will be older. Maybe she'll be in college. Maybe she'll have completely different interests. Maybe she'll have forgotten some of the details of that night. But then someone will show her the footage. And suddenly, she'll be back in Baltimore. Back in that stadium. Back in that exact moment. Back to the second when Jimin handed her the jacket. And she'll remember exactly how it felt. That's the real value of a concert. Not the ticket. Not the merchandise. Not the souvenirs. The memories. And this one came completely unexpectedly. But wait. Because there is something else about this moment that makes it even more adorable. Look at the size difference. Jimin is standing there on the massive stage. And in front of him is this tiny fan, overwhelmed by everything happening around her. It almost feels like a movie scene. The stadium is roaring. The lights are glowing. Everyone is watching. And somehow, in the middle of all that noise, this small moment manages to stand out. That's why people keep replaying it. Because it feels genuine. It wasn't some massive production number. It wasn't a carefully staged spectacle. It was just Jimin being Jimin. And that's exactly why ARMY connected with it. People don't only admire artists because of what they can do on stage. They also remember how those artists make people feel. And for this little fan? She probably felt incredibly seen in that moment. That's something every fan understands. When you're in a crowd of thousands, it's easy to feel like just another person. Everyone is holding the same light stick. Everyone is shouting the same name. Everyone wants to be noticed. So when your favorite artist suddenly looks directly at you, it can feel almost impossible to describe. For a child especially, that can become a core memory. The kind of memory that doesn't disappear easily. And then Jimin added something to it that she could physically take home. His jacket. That's why the reaction is so emotional. It wasn't simply Jimin gave a fan a jacket. It was Jimin just gave one little ARMY a memory she may carry for the rest of her life. And maybe that's the most beautiful part. Because Jimin will probably perform hundreds of shows. Thousands of fans will see him. Millions will watch clips online. But for this one fan, there was only one Jimin. One Baltimore night. One moment. One jacket. And that combination can never happen again in exactly the same way. That's what makes live music so special. Every second disappears as soon as it happens. You can't pause a concert. You can't rewind real life. But sometimes, a camera catches it. And suddenly, a fleeting moment becomes something the world can remember. That's exactly what happened here. The footage captured the moment. ARMY noticed it. And suddenly people everywhere were celebrating this lucky little fan. Some were emotional. Some were shocked. Some were probably thinking the same thing. How do I become this lucky? Because let's be honest. If Jimin handed you his jacket, would you ever wash it? Okay, maybe that's a question we don't even need to answer. But you know what I mean. The sentimental value of something like that is enormous. And there's another layer to the story. For a young fan, Meeting or even interacting with an idol can feel like something from another world. You see them on screens. You hear their songs. You watch performances. You learn their personalities. But they're still physically far away. Then suddenly, they're standing directly in front of you. That distance disappears. And for a few seconds, the person you've watched through a screen becomes real. That's an incredibly powerful experience. And Jimin's gesture made that experience even more unforgettable. He didn't need to say anything complicated. The jacket itself became the message. I saw you. I noticed you. Here. And sometimes, those tiny gestures mean more than people realize. Because fans don't necessarily expect something in return. They come because they love the music. They come because BTS means something to them. They come because they want to experience the atmosphere. So when an artist gives something unexpectedly personal back, it can feel incredibly meaningful. And that's why the crowd reaction matters too. The people around the little fan weren't just watching a celebrity interaction. They were watching someone's dream come true. And when someone else's dream comes true in front of you, it's almost impossible not to smile. Even if you're jealous. Even if you're thinking, why her and not me? You still smile. Because deep down, you know how special that moment is. And that's what made the Baltimore crowd feel so connected. For a few seconds, everyone wasn't competing for attention. Everyone was simply watching something beautiful happen. And then came the moment when Jimin had to move on. That's the bittersweet part. The interaction couldn't last forever. The performance had to continue. The music had to move forward. The stadium had to return to its usual chaos. But the little fan remained there, holding the jacket. And suddenly, everything had changed. The concert was no longer just a concert for her. It had become personal. She had her own story inside the larger BTS story. And that's something no one could take away from her. Years later, people may forget exactly what song was playing. They may forget where they were standing. But that jacket? That becomes the physical proof that the moment happened. And maybe that's why ARMY couldn't stop talking about it. Because it represents something bigger than a souvenir. It represents connection. The connection between an artist and the people who support him. A connection that can sometimes happen in just a few seconds. And when it does, you remember it. You feel it. You treasure it. That's what happened in Baltimore. One little fan. One unexpected interaction. One jacket. And thousands of people watching it unfold. But here's the thing I love most about this moment. Jimin didn't need to make it complicated. He didn't need a grand gesture. The moment became special precisely because it was so simple. A jacket. A fan. A smile. A stadium full of people. And suddenly, an ordinary concert moment became something unforgettable. So if you were that little fan, what would you have done? Would you have cried? Would you have hugged the jacket? Would you have been completely frozen? Or would you have immediately started screaming? Because honestly, I don't think any answer would be surprising. When something you've dreamed about suddenly happens in front of you, your emotions don't always know what to do. And that's why this moment feels so authentic. You can almost imagine the little fan trying to process everything. The lights. The noise. The music. The people. And then Jimin. Right there. Giving her his jacket. It's almost too much for one night. But somehow, that's exactly what happened. And while the internet may focus on how lucky she was, there is another side to the story. She wasn't just lucky to receive a jacket. She was lucky to experience a moment that many fans spend years hoping for. A moment where the distance between artist and audience disappears. A moment where someone you've admired from afar acknowledges you personally. And those moments don't have to be enormous to matter. Sometimes the smallest gestures leave the deepest marks. That's the lesson hidden inside this adorable Baltimore moment. In a world where everything moves so quickly, a few seconds of genuine kindness can stay with someone for years. And maybe that's why Jimin's gesture touched so many people. Because it wasn't just about him. It was about the feeling behind it. The feeling of being noticed. The feeling of being remembered. The feeling that, for just a few seconds, you weren't invisible in a crowd of thousands. You mattered. And for that little fan, Jimin made sure she had a memory she would probably never forget. The concert eventually moved on. The lights continued. The songs continued. The crowd continued screaming. But somewhere inside that stadium, one little fan was holding Jimin's jacket. And at that exact moment, she probably didn't realize just how special the memory would become. She had no idea people around the world would eventually see the footage. She probably didn't know ARMY would be talking about how lucky she was. She probably didn't know that one tiny gesture would become one of those moments people replay again and again. But that's the beauty of memories. You don't always know you're living one while it's happening. Sometimes you only realize it later. And this feels like one of those moments. A little fan went to Baltimore to see BTS. She probably expected an amazing concert. Instead, she got something far more personal. A moment with Jimin. And a jacket to remember it by. So yes, she was incredibly lucky. But maybe Jimin was also lucky. Because moments like this remind artists why the stage matters in the first place. Behind all the lights, choreography, and enormous crowds are real people. People who sing along. People who travel for hours. People who wait for months. People who carry BTS's music through difficult days and happy ones. And every once in a while, an artist gets the chance to give a little piece of that love back. In Baltimore, that exchange happened through something as simple as a jacket. And somehow, that was enough to make thousands of people smile. So the next time you watch that clip, don't just look at the jacket. Look at the reaction. Look at the surprise. Look at the crowd. Look at how quickly an ordinary concert moment transforms into a memory. Because that's what makes this so beautiful. It wasn't planned in some grand cinematic way. It happened naturally. And that's exactly why it feels so special. One moment. A little fan was just another person in the audience. The next. She had Jimin's jacket in her hands. And somewhere in between those two moments, she got something even more valuable. A memory. A memory that may stay with her long after the concert lights have gone dark. Long after the music has faded. Long after the stadium has emptied. Because some moments don't end when the concert ends. They follow you home. They become stories you tell. They become photographs you keep. They become videos you replay. And sometimes, they become the moment you remember whenever someone asks, "What was the most unforgettable thing that ever happened to you at a concert?" For this little ARMY, there may already be an answer. Jimin gave me his jacket. And honestly, what could possibly beat that? If this moment made you smile, let me know in the comments. What would you do if Jimin suddenly gave you his jacket during a BTS concert? Would you cry, freeze, scream, or completely forget how to speak? And if you think this little fan will remember this moment forever, share this with another ARMY who would absolutely lose their mind if Jimin did the same thing to them. Because sometimes, the biggest concert memories aren't the loudest ones. Sometimes, they're the quiet, unexpected moments. A glance. A smile. A simple gesture. A jacket placed into the hands of one very lucky little fan. And on that unforgettable Baltimore night, Jimin turned a few seconds into a memory that could last a lifetime.